Joining us now live from Cairo, our man in the Middle East, Eddie Yeranian. Eddie, a longtime veteran CBS News correspondent. He's also a veteran correspondent with the Voice of America live in Egypt. Eddie, great to have you, man.
Thank you, John.
Give us your take on the U.S. raid by the Delta Force, the killing of Baghdadi. Just what was your take on it?
Well, according to Arab media, he was northwest of Idlib in Syria, which is controlled by Turkish proxies, and many Arab media sources have accused Turkey of being behind or being one of the parties behind this Islamic State group. Mm-hmm. So my take is that the Turks were protecting him and that the Russians finked on him and told Trump where he was and let him go and take him out.
So you think that the Turks were playing footsie with him, right? Telling us one thing and doing another. I mean, this is pretty big, Ed.
Yeah.
And you think that the fingering of him came from Russia?
Yeah, I do. I believe that he's been fingered several times in other places, but there are a variety of powers that be, I believe, without going into too many details, that don't want him or didn't want him taken out. So I think the Turkish forces were in collusion with a number of other parties, and I can't prove that, of course.
That's your conjecture based on your analysis.
Yeah, over the 5-6 years that he's been around. Yeah.
So why would the Turks be protecting him?
I think they're trying to stir up disorder in that part of the world, both in Iraq and in Syria, northern Syria, for territorial gains. They're also active in Turkey, in Libya as well. They've also been fingered as one of the parties creating disorder in Libya. So I think they're doing this in a variety of places. I think globally it's been said in Arab media that President Erdogan is trying to resurrect the Ottoman Empire, or was trying to do that. I don't think he's coming anywhere close, but he's certainly creating a lot of disorder.
So the Russians fingering him and confirming with our intel sources that he was there at this location at this time, what was their incentive in getting him out of there?
I think they're trying to end the war in Syria, as is President Trump, in order to get things back to normal and have these floods of refugees stop and these terrorist groups that are keeping our troops pinned down in places like Iraq and Syria out of there. I think there are a number of intelligence agencies that would like to see us pinned down, so they're trying to keep us there. And I think the incentive for the Russians was to say, hey, here's your guy, end the group, and you can leave.
Let me ask you something. What happens to ISIS now? We understand from various reports that Baghdadi was he kind of made all the decisions, but we understand he had basically 6 lieutenants acting as field commanders, if you will. Is there an internal battle for control? How does somebody end up in the same job? Do they have a meeting and elect somebody, or does somebody just take it over? How does that work?
I suspect that in the same way as Ayman Zawahiri took over from Osama bin Laden, you'll have whoever is in this orbit, this Islamist orbit, including their sponsors in various countries, that will make a decision, and they will use their media savvy to put out a bulletin that a new leader has been chosen, and they'll pump him up with propaganda to say that, hey, we're still here, hey, we're still out there to get you. And I think various countries would like to see this continue ad infinitum. And, without wishing to finger these countries because, I just get it back in my face.
Right.
put it this way, Trump scored a big victory because he's put the group out of business, at least temporarily, and he's said, hey, now we have a good reason to pull out of Syria. Now, Afghanistan is a much more difficult nut to crack because you've got more countries that would like to see us pinned down there, so I don't think he's going to be able to pull that off immediately, but certainly this is one step toward ending these futile 25-year war plans that people in our bureaucracy and whatever other groups support this sort of thing, the neocons, whatever you want to call them, and their country allies that are pushing this kind of game.
Well, the military-industrial war machine complex where everybody makes the money as we stay in these endless wars, and all the lobbyists and K Street, the defense contractor firms, they make billions of dollars, Ed, off these wars, supplying everything. That's why they want us to stay. I mean, you get to D.C. and you just understand, and I've said this 100 times, you start to understand the grip, the ironclad grip that the neocons have on this government. How they got it, I don't know, but they have it and it's real, and there's a lot of money behind it, so it's just tough to leverage them out, the president trying to do that. Eddie Yeranian with us. You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network, trucking the truth across America. I'm your Godzilla of the truth. Ed, live in Cairo, our man in the Middle East, been with me for 8 years or something like that. Ed, it's been a long time, ever since I started. Whatever our statistician Den Black says it is, that's what it is. Ed, let me just ask you this. Egyptian media, what was their reaction to this?
Well, they're pleased to see the group being put out of business. I can't say that, but certainly it has a branch in the Sinai that's also being supported by various countries. Since someone has been funneling those people to the Sinai, it's not easy to get to the Sinai. It's pretty much blocked off. You have to really go through tortuous channels to get there. And these same countries would like to see Egypt bogged down in the Sinai. And ultimately, I think the goal, well, I mean, this sounds like a conspiracy theory, so I'm not going to go there. But part of the game, I think, is when you've got terrorists on the ground, you suddenly start having reasons to attack them from the air. You attack them from the air, then you need a base for those drones or whatever, and then you spread your peons all over the map, and you've got end up with a pretty strong set of bases all over the place. And I think that's part of the game. As Dr. Schuer pointed out, I hadn't really thought of this, but he pointed this out a couple years ago. We were talking about Niger. Niger is very important for uranium. You may remember Saddam Hussein allegedly buying yellow cake from Niger. The French need uranium because of a very important industry, nuclear industry, and that's where they buy their uranium. And so keeping enemies of France would like to see France pinned down in Niger, and we've been trying to keep that place clear. So you've got a variety of countries with a variety of interests that are often very banal, like France's need for uranium from Niger, that cause disruptions in a country and keep that country in total chaos. Like Niger, like Libya, somebody would like to mess up perhaps the Italians because they buy their oil and gas from Libya. So did the French, I believe. So certain countries are trying to get back at other countries. It's often very banal, and they use these terrorists and their terrorist tactics. Someone thought of it, and somebody spread them all over the place. And it's really an intelligence agency tool in order to attack another country. And the Turks were fingered very quite clearly with this group by their own media. They had a Turkish newspaper that took pictures of the Turkish intelligence sending weapons to the Islamic State group inside Syria. There was no doubt about it. And Mr. Erdogan closed down that newspaper, arrested the journalists. And for some reason, the media, the Western media, didn't want to talk about it a lot, probably because some of the countries that were collaborating with Mr. Erdogan don't want that stuff going out either. So globally, I remember where this group started because it started in 2014 in the north of Iraq, in Mosul, and they robbed the central bank. And the former Iraqi intelligence agency chief, Mr. Samurai, said on Arab media that the Turks were involved, and also he fingered people in Suleimania in Kurdistan. And the Kurds also would have liked to see disorder in Mosul in order to start spreading their, they had goals to set up an independent Kurdistan, which unfortunately for them didn't see the light of day or hasn't seen the light of day. But various parties are trying to create disorder for their own territorial gain.
Well, you're not spinning a conspiracy theory because what you're giving us is facts. I mean, the fact of the matter is the newspaper did have the pictures. The fact of the matter is Erdogan did shut them down as a result of that. And I'm going to go to word from our sponsors. When I get back, though, I'll only have a couple minutes. But you mentioned there might be other countries involved who were either supporting Erdogan's efforts to, let's say, not take out ISIS. Let's be soft rather than say harbor, not take them out. There might have been other countries that collaborated with that. Back with Eddie Yeranian live in Cairo. Eddie, so you mentioned there might be other countries that are looking the other way with Erdogan's objective, which is to kind of not take out ISIS, as you surmised, conjectured. Who might those be?
Well, let's put it this way. I think that Mr. Obama's former spy chief, John Brennan, who's on the hot seat for a lot of things these days, and God only knows where that's going. But anyway, let's just be very concrete. He was supporting moderate rebels in Syria, and that was the line that was being given at the time, that we were giving funds for the Turkish intelligence to put together moderate rebel forces inside Turkey. They did, and at the time they said, well, most of them defected to ISIS, or some of them defected to the other group, Jabhat al-Nusra. But clearly, the Turks had to have known that was going to happen, and I suspect Mr. Brennan had to have known that was going to happen. Here in Cairo, there are people, former retired intel people, and they don't like Turkey very much. Let's say that from the outset.
Right.
But they were accusing Mr. Brennan of being the father of the Islamic State group. Now, I think being the father is a little bit pushing it a little bit too far.
Right.
But certainly he had to have known that those moderate rebels we were training in Turkey were going to defect to the Islamic State group, and clearly the Turkish intelligence knew that was going to happen. So he also fingered himself very recently, last year, by saying, when we were talking about who was behind the killing of Khashoggi, the Saudi journalist in Istanbul, he said the first people I would ask were Turkish intelligence. So if Turkish intelligence is supporting the Islamic State group, and Mr. Brennan, the first people he would ask were Turkish intelligence, I would be asking myself what Mr. Brennan's relation is with Turkish intelligence. So, of course, I think there are people who are going to be investigating that very soon, from what I'm hearing in some of the media, on some of the media outlets. I certainly hope that's the case. He's also been fingered for another things, but I won't go there. I'm going to get my head handed to me. But anyway, what other countries? I think that Britain was accused by the Russians. Now, I'm not accusing them myself. I'm just saying that Britain was accused by the Russians of being behind, along with Turkey, the gas attacks in the north of Syria. There were like three major attacks, because I looked into that. Is the one that was in Khan Shaykhun, which is near Turkish territory.
Right.
Many media outlets suggested that gas came from Turkey, not from Syria. Mm-hmm. The Syrian government said that the gas attack took place before their planes even took off. I believe that's true, which is why I don't think it was the Syrian government that did it. And it was the Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons or whatever, accused, of course, the Syrian government of doing it, and I believe it had a Turkish trail to it. There were people in the organization who were working from Turkey, perhaps the president, I can't remember, but someone very high up in the organization. And I remember a lot of American media outlets going to Turkey to investigate this gas attack, which seemed odd to me at the time,
right,
because they were not going to find, what were they going to find in Turkey?
Right.
But anyway, the trail to me seemed like it was the Turks were involved, Turkish intelligence, and I believe I've also seen in the Russians accuse. I don't believe I did hear them accuse Britain. Now you'd say, well, do you trust the Russians? Well, for a lot of things I don't, but on that one I do. I believe the Russians are correct, and I believe the British were behind that gas attack along with the Turks. So
we got to roll. Ed Yeranian, thank you.
Yes.
Live Cairo. Ed, thanks for being with us today. Always a pleasure. We're probably going to have you on again this week to continue this discussion.